Ever since the release of Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, and especially since the mess of a story that Security Breach had, having a good bit of its story told through anthology books that were rather, confusing at times, there's been a question that's been pretty commonly discussed. That question is, should the game series be rebooted? Is this series just so fundamentally flawed that it needs a hard reset? Well, no, not really. It doesn't really need one, but, I think it would probably be nice because I think we can all agree that this series is a little messy, and every fan has at least something in the lore that they think is kind of stupid. Before I say why I think a reboot would be nice, I want to say what I'm not talking about. I like the Mimic, and I like a lot about modern FNAF. I am excited to see where this story goes, and I do think the Mimic is a really cool character with a whole lot of potential. I'm writing this before Secret of the Mimic is out, so keep that in mind. I want the story of the Mimic, Gregory, and definitely Cassie to have a good conclusion. And I'm not saying that classic FNAF was just so much better than the modern games, it has a lot of issues as well. I'm not saying that the series should have ended at 3 or even 6, I like the basic story, but the more and more things that get added onto it, the just more frustrating the issues with it get. But if I like this series so much, then why am I saying that it should be rebooted? Well, this series has always been a little messy in areas, and while you could definitely blame Security Breach and Help Wanted for a lot of this messiness, I think that the bigger culprit is the Fazbear Frights book series. First off, we have no clue what's canon, so instead of old FNAF theorizing where we were given breadcrumbs and we had to decipher and figure out what story was being told, we are given loads of pointless fluff and we have to decipher if any of it means anything. But that wouldn't really be a big issue. It still seems like a fun way to tell a cryptic story if there were only like a few books released every now and again, but I'm just not gonna remember everything from these books, man. I can't. Because there's been over 60 short stories across 20 different books, with multiple being released a year until recently, and that's a lot of reading that I'm just not gonna do. I don't really like reading that much. Granted, they are mostly fun little goosebumps-like stories that don't really contribute to the plot that much, even if they do get a little repetitive here and there. But then 1 in every 10 stories is just randomly incredibly lore-heavy with huge reveals, or it's some seemingly random story that has some random lore tidbit here that contradicts a previous theory, or adds a completely stupid addition to the plot, and this makes Frights feel more like homework for theorizing than anything else. So, overall, while I do like Frights and Tales as a concept, if they were to tell fun little stories with small little lore tidbits thrown in there, that's just not really what they are. And while I'm happy a lot of people like them, just the pure abundance of stories has just caused a whole lot of headaches for theorizing, and a weird amount of hostility from the fan base when people forget aspects of these books, or, if fans just simply aren't interested in them. Now, thankfully, Frights and Tales have both stopped. Secret of the Mimic has no real book tie-in or external media linked to it, so everything necessary to the story will be in the game. Even if some things are cryptic, there won't be any pointless debates on if any of the game is just canon or not, so that's cool. And I don't mind external media, I just don't want the book-to-game ratio to look like this. So, okay, Frights and Tales were messy, but that's in the past. And while it will always make theorizing a little messy for characters like Andrew or Golden Freddy, the future of the games are pretty safe from this, right? Well, yeah, but that kind of just leads me to my next point. There's just kind of a lot of stuff in the timeline. It spans all the way from the 70s to the future, maybe all the way to the 2050s. This is all because as early as FNAF 3, which came out in 2015, that game probably took place in 2023, making every sequel take place further and further into the future, and unless each game happens one after another, which they definitely don't, yeah, the modern games take place far, far into the future. And if you want to have a story take place in, like, the modern day or the 2000s or something, you have to work around this convoluted and honestly strange timeline. Adding more and more onto it, and to be honest, it just kind of breaks some immersion. With the fictional company of Fazbear Entertainment going bankrupt, then having a massive mall, then being so massive that they're basically Disney, even though they're depicted as a smaller franchise more often than not, and it's just messy and weird. And I know I've used the word messy a lot, but that's just kind of what Five Nights at Freddy's is. It's messy, even when I love it. Now, is this really that important? I mean, not really. Most of the small immersion-breaking issues with the timeline don't really matter. Also, Tales and Fright stories are really a thing of the past. Plus, it's not like there weren't some good stories in those books, but that brings me to my final and most self-centered issue. The franchise at the moment has just so many characters, many of which are really underutilized, especially many of the characters who are important to the story. Ennard and Golden Freddy come to mind. A reboot would give these characters a second chance, especially Golden Freddy and the spirit possessing him, who has some of the most aura and intrigue of any character, one of the most mysterious and intriguing characters who was largely disregarded after the second game, up until UCN, where his mysterious nature was finally given a payoff, showing him being absolutely consumed by rage, only for the books to suggest that this other random kid is actually the main antagonist of UCN, and all of the Golden Freddy imagery is just kind of completely pointless, and Fredbear was actually a red herring this whole time. Yeah, I don't really like that. I'm just gonna choose to believe that Frights is telling its own story until proven otherwise, because yeah, I just don't really like Andrew that much. Anyways, yeah, before I go on another tangent, I think every fan has at least one aspect that they feel could have been treated a little better, and a reboot, or at least an alternate reality game spin-off or something, is really the only way to get some of these things, but I'm not just gonna sit here and complain. Before I end the video, I want to spitball a couple ideas. I think a pretty solid way to go about this is to have basically just a retelling of the first game with remodeled, redesigned, and just kind of higher quality models of the main characters with a, kind of semi-new aesthetic, maybe an early 2000s theme or something. The gameplay could consist of, 5 traditional office segments with a bunch more cinematic aspects put in there during some, scripted segments or something. There could also be, different free roam mini games and missions between nights, making it a longer and more modern experience. But, also after the retelling of the first game, branch off and tackle some new ideas with a mix of old and new characters that really just couldn't happen in the modern story. And maybe, just maybe, sprinkle some aspects of the newer games into older games, like Ennard, but he's the final boss of the first game and he's made out of, the classics or something, or, I don't know, or maybe have Vanessa be the night guard, or maybe make her like the daughter of Afton or something. Okay, I forgot about you. The movie universe is just kind of doing everything I'm wanting. If only there was a game for, the movie or something like that. Wait a minute. This is perfect.